Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development Program, I have decided to create a series of video presentations for the class. Now, I did about 175 presentations based on the book we're going to be using for the class, but now I had gone over to a site called .netcurry.com, went under their tutorials, found their MVC tutorials. All right, and they've got a lot of tutorials, period. But there's 147 tutorials in here. All right, and in the last lecture, I did the history of ASP.NET Part 1, the way things used to be. All right, now I'm going to go into the history of ASP.NET Part 2. There's three parts in this article. Part 1, as it says, was an overview of the initial design of how Microsoft first set this up. In Part 2, we're going to see how things like changes in web development, things like mobile phones, change the way things worked in here. Now, this is where we're using this right now. So in other words, in the next series of articles, or the next part, we'll be talking about ASP.NET Core. But where we are right now at Rankin Technical College is we're not there yet. Part of the reason we're not there yet is there are still a lot of companies out there that are using MVC. All right? So they've got here a new direction, 2008 to 2014. That doesn't mean that it ended in 2014, because many places are still using MVC, ASP.NET MVC 5 as we are in the class. So changes in the web were happening fast, and ASP.NET was somewhat ill-prepared for them. Okay. On one hand, increasing amounts of functionality were being moved to the client. For years, the client was known as being a thin client, where the server was known as being a thick server. In other words, the work was basically all being done on the server. All right. While ASP.NET had tools aimed at JavaScript, the focus was still primarily or predominantly on controls. It was possible to write JavaScript and add it to a page using the script manager, but it was kind of a pain. I did some of this stuff. All right. JSON was becoming more and more popular, the JavaScript object notation. All right. It says, in summary, what we had at the kind of the end of that last article we went over, as it says, was leaky web forms abstraction combined with the increasing importance of JavaScript and JSON. So, Microsoft was aware of this. They're not stupid. So in late 2007, they announced they were working on a new framework called ASP.NET Model View Controller, or MVC, to address these concerns. It says Microsoft went as far as sharing the following list of key goals as part of their announcement. Number 1, how many times have you heard me talk about this? The separation of concerns design principle, where again, in the model view controller architecture, every portion in there, the model should basically be the data store and the classes that handle the data store and the data store logic. The view is what you end up showing the end user. The controller is the traffic cop. It gets the requests as they come in, figures out which model should be called. The model will do its thing and return information back to the controller. The controller will figure out which view should be called to send appropriate information back to the client. Grants full control over the generated I'm reading TDD down here. HTML provides a lot of support for test-driven development. integrates with the existing ASP.NET infrastructure. That's important too. A lot of places, would transition over, but weren't necessarily just going to stop doing web forms and just start. It's Friday, we're going to stop doing web forms now, so Monday we'll start doing a MVC. Doesn't work like that. Pluggable, uses the ASPX view engine, supports the inversion of control, and provides complete control over URLs and navigation. All right. And, we've talked about this before. The author says here, MVC has been around for a long time as a pattern. Yeah, probably about 40 years. Eventually, version 1.0 was released in March 2009. Notice it shipped as a standalone release, separate from the .NET framework. The code was available with Codeplex, as it says. This marked pretty much an important milestone for Microsoft, all right, as they move towards more and more open sourcing. Developers now had an alternative that embraced the web and didn't try to hide details such as HTML, HTTP, JavaScript, etc. Now, this shouldn't be anything new. An HTTP request would now be served by an action method of the controller class. That's what we've been doing. The URL was matched to the controller in action through a new routing module that allowed convention-based routes. The action method would then perform the necessary logic and return an action result. All right. Then it would render a view with what should be rendered. Views would be ASPX templates located in a different folder. There's really nothing in here that we have not gone over in class. Then they talk next about the kind of customary obligatory type of hello world. You've seen this. All right. And they say here, underneath the code that you see up on the screen, a corresponding view index.aspx, same name as the action method, all right, would be in the views folder. Again, you've seen this before. We've done this kind of stuff. It says common layout and HTML structure were achieved through master pages. Well, this is one of the things that's changed over time. The framework did not need to be told where the controllers or the views were located. The idea of conventions was built into it. The default /controller/action was provided. The framework would automatically look for a controller class inside of the controllers folder that matched the name on the URL. Again, nothing new from what we've been talking about. But remember, there were people out there that have been using web forms for years. All right, and Microsoft had to decide, do we just basically, kind of like they did with earlier versions of Windows, just say at a certain date, we're going to stop supporting this? And they decided to not really do that. All right. Web forms is still supported by Microsoft. It says for many who worked regularly with web forms, skepticism was the initial reaction. The problem with MVC is that even for experts, it eats up a lot of valuable time and requires a lot of effort. In other words, it's not that easy to learn and become proficient at. Time and money are the greatest reasons why web forms would be chosen over MVC. The complexity of the MVC learning curve was highlighted as one of its disadvantages. Mentioned here the biggest downside of MVC is we're going back to the days of ASP. All right. Now, am I saying that that's true? I'm saying that's what this article says. But remember, as time was going on, we kept coming up with newer and newer versions. In other words, MVC2 was better than MVC1. MVC3 was better than MVC2, etc. As mentioned here, as MVC continued its way, it says the skepticism among ASP.NET developers morphed into confusion. There were other languages that people thought were easier to use. All right. The development cycle of MVC continued to be independent of the .NET framework when MVC3 was released. There was a big thing in here was the introduction of Razor. We've been using Razor. Releasing and using open source libraries for .NET had never been easier. That was the beginning of NuGet. All right. One of the things I like about this .NET Curry, and I'm not going to even click this, but notice all of the different hyperlinks in here. So if you want more on dependency injection, for example, you can take a look right there. It says around the time MVC3 came out, many developers and companies started to realize MVC3 was here to stay, so some of them started to invest in it. Time, money, effort, etc. Even more importantly, MVC again had that separation of concerns, and it provided a good basis for test-driven design. 2012, MVC4 was released. Notice a new mobile template that used jQuery. It played nice with others. Shortly after, an update to MVC was released that included SPA. That's how this whole thing started. And I've actually found a couple of articles in here. I don't even know if I still have them up on the screen right now. I may or I may not. And I'm starting to go through these right now. Business application using HTML5, ASP.NET MVC, Web API, and Knockout.js, Part 1 and Part 2. As you'd probably guess, between the two of these, that's about 40 pages of reading. And you look at it and you go, well, Jeff, do you even want to do that? Look, 10/12/2015, 10/29/2015. Yeah. All right. That said, again, we're still using MVC5 in our classroom. All right. 2013, 1 ASP.NET. The refinements to ASP.NET continued in late 2013. Here, Microsoft repositioned all the technologies as part of ASP.NET. So MVC became a player. The fact that a default template was provided with Bootstrap was another excuse for using it. Maybe it was a little ugly, but it was a start. You've all seen this. ASP.NET reached 2014 in good shape with several libraries offered under the one ASP.NET development. All right. And they mentioned the thing, again, it says outside of ASP.NET, things were happening. Things like the mean stack. All right. In the next article, it says here, the ASP.NET team had much bigger plans for ASP.NET than incremental improvements. So, part 3 of this 3-part series of articles, which I'll start in a moment, is on ASP.NET Core. So I'll be back with that shortly.